Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the AMD Radeon R7 250X. In 2014 this $99 graphics card was ideal for anyone looking for decent 1080p performance on a budget. It's been a while since AMD have released anything at this price point actually as far as discrete graphics cards go, but I guess their APUs, namely the 3200G, fills that void these days. The upcoming 4000G series may also alleviate the need for the company to reveal any new separate graphics cards that fit into this entry-level category. Whenever I test random cards, I also try and include any details that make them unique or special. I guess the 250X's claim to fame is that it was the last 1GB GPU to release, if you don't count OEM cards or DDR3 cards. Yeah, even then I'm not 100% sure I haven't missed something. So it doesn't really have much going for it as far as cool and quirky things are concerned. Today we'll be seeing how well it plays games and checking out which settings are necessary for both 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. Let's start with Battlefield 1. It's an older game but still very popular and quite forgiving on weaker hardware. In order to achieve at least 60 FPS on average here, we had to turn things down to low and set the resolution to 900p. This isn't a terrible sacrifice, and thankfully there was no need to mess around with the resolution scale. This was a legit 900p experience for what that's worth. If you have a card like this and want to play some Battlefield 1 but don't mind 30 FPS or closer to it, then just how high can you turn things up? Well, we can actually revert back to 1080p and use the medium settings here. The game looks a little better and of course quite a bit sharper, but there will be a few more frame dips. When it comes to testing older cards like this, I'll probably include settings for both 30 and 60 FPS more often in the future, just to give you a better idea of how much you can push the settings for your desired frame rate. Now when it came to Far Cry 5, we had to choose 720p and turn the settings down to low. We also needed to reduce the resolution scale to 0.8 or 80%, so I think we were effectively playing the game at 1024 by 576. This meant that we just about scraped 60 FPS, though dropping the res even more would have helped us eliminate a few of the frame dips I saw here and there. In fact, this would have had to have been done once again with the resolution scale slider. I believe it goes all the way down to 0.5. Let's say though that you are happy with a more console-like experience and 30 FPS will do just fine. In that case you can choose 900p resolution as well as 100% resolution scaling, which is pretty much the default setting. Low settings are still ideal though, otherwise there'll be more sub 30 FPS dips, and it certainly will be noticeable, especially in a first person title like Far Cry 5, and when the action starts to heat up, well, those frame dips won't be very welcome to say the least. Now Fortnite seems to go into panic mode when we use a 1GB card. Textures fail to load and sometimes they'll just appear through the character right at an important moment. For example, a tree randomly appeared in front of the camera or through the character's head, so yeah, some oddities definitely occurred here. At least the game will run at 60 FPS plus with 900p once again and the low in-game preset. The 3D resolution scale slider also went untouched. If you are happy with 30 FPS though, then feel free to crank those settings up to medium and use 1080p resolution here as well. The same issues with textures remained though, so bear that in mind as a 2GB GPU would be better. In fact, pretty much every 1GB card I've tested has this same issue, and it's also occurred on some weaker CPUs as well. So I definitely recommend looking up specific benchmarks for your hardware, maybe here on YouTube, just to see what others have experienced when it comes to glitches and such. GTA 5 never seems to let me down and will run on a lot of older and weaker cards. The R7 250X can handle the game at 60 FPS with relative ease at 1080p normal here. For my test, I drove around a busy area of Los Santos where you might find yourself quite a lot of the time. The countryside will give you a few more frames though, so if like me you spend a lot of time causing carnage around there, then you'll have a pretty decent time with this title. If you want to turn things up a little more and get GTA looking a bit better, then you can set everything apart from the textures to high. The texture settings have to be at normal to avoid stuttering. I noticed frequent dips to the low 20s or worse when adjusting the texture option, because even with the lowest settings, the VRAM limit will be exceeded. Now some games deal with this a little better. I have turned some titles settings up past this VRAM limitation, games that have this visible VRAM limitation, and I've experienced no problems. But in GTA 5 here, well, turning up those texture settings with a 1GB card like this will cause a few problems, to say the least. I've also recently been enjoying Halo 3 on the PC and finding how it performs on various hardware. It seems to do okay, even on lower end stuff. We tested it with the Athlon 3000G not long ago, so here I thought that it should do quite well. With 900p and the performance settings, you might think that this is actually a bit drastic, but I use these settings because at 1080p or at 900p with higher settings, there were quite a few frame dips that caused drops below 60, sometimes way below, which was quite odd, and I wasn't expecting it. Now of course this isn't ideal when you're trying to target and maintain that number. We were therefore exceeding 60 FPS by quite some margin here with Halo once we had adjusted the settings and chose the performance preset. If you don't mind more frequent dips but want better visual quality, then you can stick to 1080p and the original graphics settings. There will still be times that the game exceeds 60 FPS here as well though, and of course different areas of the game, for example different levels, will have varying impacts on the performance. The same can be said for pretty much every title. So finally it's Modern Warfare Warzone. Now as you can imagine, 60 FPS doesn't really come easily for the R7 250X here, and we had to take some drastic measures. The first was dropping the resolution to 800 by 600, which is the lowest that the game supports. The resolution scale was also on the same. The next thing we had to do was turn everything right down in terms of the settings and anti-aliasing, shadows, things like that. Pretty much everything was at the lowest settings or off if that was an option that was available. I'm afraid to say that even then, 60 FPS wasn't really doable. The game touched on it a couple of times, specifically in less crowded areas, but that was about it. To save yourself from looking at what are some very noticeable pixels on screen, then you may as well turn the resolution up to 720p and average around 40 FPS instead. This isn't actually too different from before, but Warzone will look a little sharper and your eyes will thank you for it. I guess there are still a few games then that the R7 250X can get away with playing. If you're wondering why we didn't test Red Dead Redemption 2, a game that usually frequents the benchmark results, well, it's because it wouldn't run. It got to the in-game menu and then crashed. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you've ever owned this card and what you think of it, and whether or not you still own it today and it's still running in your system. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.